Right, welcome to the MDIC Annual Public Forum, FDA's CDRH Town Hall. And since we'll be using a lot of acronyms today, let me start by saying FDA stands for US Food and Drug Administration. If you're here, you probably know that. CDRH, Center for Devices and Radiological Health. And MDIC is the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, a private-public partnership. We'll be talking about MDIC a lot today. Anyway, last year's edition of this town hall was a great success. We learned a lot on the direction of CDRH during the pandemic. We also heard how, despite the logistical challenges and the additional workload at the agency, the men and women at the FDA continued delivering on our commitments to US patients in delivering timely therapies with the safety and effectiveness that patients expect. And while doing so, CDRH continued investing in forward-looking initiatives, pushing the boundaries further and setting us all on exciting new tracks for the future. So good morning, everyone. I'm excited to be here today. As you can see, really excited. My name is Nadim Yared. I'm the CEO of CDRH. I'm also the chairman of the board of NAMSA, and I'm approaching here the conclusion of my 2-year chairmanship of the board of MDIC. And I look forward to working with the incoming chairman, Dr. Gijo James. Now, since you're attending this virtual town hall, you probably know about MDIC and about our mission to accelerate and improve patient access to innovative, high-quality, safe, and cost-effective medical technologies. And with such a mission, you understand the crucial role that CDRH plays in this multi-party partnership. So whether you're a quality or regulatory executive, or the head of a medical technology company or division, whether you're a partner providing services to the medtech industry, or a researcher in an academic setting, or a healthcare provider, or a payer, or a patient advocate, this town hall today will provide you with important glimpse on the direction of our regulated environment for medical technologies. Now, an often overused cliche is Wayne Gretzky's, skate where the puck is going, not where it has been, right? But there is no better place to use it than here. What you'll hear today in this town hall is where CDRH is going to be now and in the future, and where you should be preparing your organization to be ready for it. This town hall will be recorded and you'll be able to watch it again, but also have your teams watch it too. Our first speaker today here needs no introduction, Dr. Jeff Shuren, Director of CDRH. Jeff, we want to hear here the tone at the top. Good morning and welcome, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Nadine. Next slide. Patients are at the heart of what we do. We seek to improve the health and the quality of life of patients and consumers by advancing medical device innovation, ensuring devices are high quality, safe, and effective, and that patients and consumers have timely access to them. Our historic mission is to advance both safety and innovation, which we view as two sides of the same coin and not competing objectives. And we are most successful at achieving our mission and vision when we work collaboratively with others, such as through public-private partnerships, and why MDIC plays such an important role in the work that we do. Next slide. MDIC's achievements and work streams have grown significantly since the official launch at the end of 2012. Despite the impact of COVID, MDIC continued to make progress over the past year. And you'll be hearing more from our subject matter experts on some of the work streams in this session and their impact on the work we do at the FDA. For example, efforts to include patient perspectives in medical device development and evaluation, led by our Patient Science and Engagement Program, are complemented by MDIC's Science of Patient Input initiative. Access to high-quality real-world data has increased the potential to generate robust real-world evidence to be used in regulatory decision-making throughout the total product lifecycle, and to provide new surveillance capabilities that the NEST Coordinating Center is leading. Our early feasibility study program advances, coupled with the resources developed through MDIC, have helped the US become a favorable location for conducting early phase medical device studies, especially in the cardiovascular space. And hopefully we will now see the same thing happen in the neurology space. Steps to formally establish the Voluntary Improvement Program and the Medical Device Safety and Information Analysis System will support FDA's efforts to advance medical device quality as part of our shared Case for Quality initiative. And in a highly connected world where many medical devices rely on software to operate safely, cybersecurity considerations have become increasingly important to provide reasonable assurance of medical device safety and effectiveness. Our partnership with MDIC on cybersecurity is focused on disseminating knowledge to support the medical device ecosystem. These are just some of the highlights, and you'll hear much more about these and others in this session. And now I'll turn it back over to Nadine.
Thank you, Jeff. Our next panelists are Dr. Maureen Dreyer, Director of Clinical Science and Quality, and Dr. Andy Farb, Chief Medical Officer of the Cardiovascular Division. And their topic today is the one Jeff mentioned, early feasibility studies programs, or how to bring back here the first-in-man studies to the United States. Dr. Maureen and Andy?
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. So one important initiative that has aimed to increase patient access to high quality, safe, and effective medical devices stems back several years ago, and it was strengthening the clinical trial enterprise. As part of the strategic goal, we invested heavily in early feasibility studies in the US. Our guidance document on EFS was released in October 2013, and it describes how these studies are for early stage devices where the study is small and is conducted in the United States. The guidance walks through some flexible approaches for addressing risk while protecting human subjects under the IDE regulations, and provides tools for sponsors to help communicate their device evaluation strategy, as well as just-in-time testing, in order to support that it's an appropriate time to begin that EFS IDE study. Next slide, please. By investing in this program and training staff to understand the concepts of EFS, we've seen a significant increase in the number of these studies being initiated in the US over the past several years. FDA does engage and interact with sponsors who are participating and seeking to conduct an EFS from that first pre-submission through to an IDE review. This interaction has helped us to maintain good approval rates for EFS, and we've seen utilization of the program across many different device areas throughout CDRH. Next slide, please. Overall, to echo some of the points that Jeff made, the US has become a favorable location for conducting these early phase device studies. We've seen stable growth in the number of EFS IDEs that have come to us. And with our commitment to this program, we've seen high rates of appropriate approval of these studies within that first review cycle. More recently, we've started to see examples of device development programs transitioning from EFS to pivotal studies. And in looking ahead, FDA is interested in increasing utilization of this program across more clinical specialties. We've seen how the development of MDIC's clinical site consortia for EFS can help sponsors get their studies initiated. With the EFS Cardiovascular Clinical Site Consortium up and running, they're now initiating plans to develop a similar consortium in the neurovascular space. So we're excited to continue to support EFS and its impact on the clinical trial enterprise overall. Thanks. Back to Nadine.
Thank you, Maureen. Our next panelist here is the impressive Deputy Director of the Office of Strategic Partnerships and Technology Innovation, Dr. Michelle Tarver. And if you have never heard Dr. Michelle Tarver speak about patient engagement, you should. Today's the opportunity. She will give us a quick update here today on CDRH's patient science and engagement programs. Michelle?
Hello, I'm Michelle, and I've had the pleasure of leading the patient science and engagement program over the past few years. Our program has been inspired by patients and driven by science, and our team is committed to integrating and amplifying the patient's voice in our medical device work. Next slide. This effort has paid off. We have currently seen 24 submissions of patient preference information that have been conducted by industry that are either completed or in the pipeline. These studies have impacted our benefit risk decision-making, have expanded labeled indications for medical devices, and have helped to inform the performance targets for clinical studies. We also have seen over 50% of our PMAs, HDEs, de novos, and 510Ks with clinical data, including PROs in their submissions. And this has been critical to helping us expand the patient's voice in our work. But this work cannot be conducted without valid scientific evidence. Next slide. We have been working collaboratively to develop well-defined, fit-for-purpose clinical outcome assessments, as well as high-quality patient preference studies. We currently have over 20 studies underway, and we recently completed the heart failure patient preference study, as well as a Bayesian design analysis with MDIC. We're exploring ways in which this information can be used to inform the design and conduct of clinical studies. Not only have we been doing research, but we've also been trying to relay transparently the lessons we've learned and how patient voice can be included in medical device evaluation. We recently issued draft guidance on the least burdensome approach to using or adapting PROs. We've also taught virtual boot camps, educating patients, device developers, and academics on ways in which patient outcomes can be captured with digital health technologies through our Centers of Excellence in Regulatory Science and Innovation. We've held public meetings on patient science, including patient preference, patient-reported outcomes, and most recently, patient-generated health data. Next slide. But patient science really needs to be informed by meaningful patient engagement. We have demonstrated our commitment to engaging patients and through our daily business culture. One way is through the Patient Engagement Advisory Committee. This committee has been meeting since 2017 and has held a number of meetings, but the conversation does not stop at the meeting. In fact, it has led to actionable impacts. We've issued draft guidance on patient engagement in the design and conduct of device clinical studies. We've issued a communication paper on how one might communicate cybersecurity vulnerabilities to patients. And we've also put forth a video encouraging diverse populations to participate in clinical trials. We've created mechanisms for our center staff to engage with patients from various different disease communities so they can hear what it's like to live with that condition as well as interface with medical devices. We've worked with MDIC to do a patient engagement forum, and we've also helped develop a resource that patients can use to navigate the healthcare system during COVID-19. This commitment to contributing the patient's voice to all the work that we do across the healthcare ecosystem has been made even more real through our MDIC work. And so with that, I'd like to turn it back over to you, Nadine.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. I have to disclose that my company is a party in the Science of Patient Input Heart Failure Project. We're very excited about this. Thank you, Michelle. Our next panelist here, Dr. Kevin Foo, is the acting director of the crucially important medical device cybersecurity program. Please listen carefully. Kevin?
Thank you. Next slide, please. So I'll just say, in my role, I'm most known for some early work I did about 10 or 15 years ago on pacemaker security. Next slide, please. But today, I'm going to talk about what FDA is doing to keep devices safe and effective despite the oncoming cybersecurity risks. And to be clear to the manufacturing community and to the healthcare delivery organizations, FDA has found 510K submissions and PMAs not to be cleared or approved based solely on cybersecurity concerns. What that means is cybersecurity is essential. Next slide, please. Cybersecurity is essential because it's very difficult to have a safe and effective medical device if it's also not got appropriate cybersecurity properties. There have been a number of activities involving computer security and medical devices over the last 10 years, including some past work with MDIC on boot camps to teach what's known as threat modeling, the most fundamental part of computer security for medical devices, as well as the Joint Security Plan and including things for the total product life cycle as far as cybersecurity goes. What's most interesting for this year in 2021 is FDA is targeting a release of the revised draft pre-market guidance. This guidance document is essentially the engineering side of the house, what FDA expects going into the cybersecurity engineering of a medical device, as opposed to the post-market guidance, which is more about how to handle a computer security incident or vulnerability in the post-market. There's also the threat modeling playbook, which is a high priority here at FDA, because it is the intent of the FDA to help the medical device manufacturing community to better communicate their threat models when they submit a product for pre-market review. Many folks are probably aware of the International Medical Device Regulators Forum, which is also working on cybersecurity topics such as the software bill of materials, which is, I think, very important for the manufacturing community to bring more consistency across international borders. Next slide, please. So I have the honor of spending 1 calendar year at the FDA, where I am on loan from the University of Michigan, where I'm normally a professor of electrical and computer science. But I have a number of priorities that I'm not going to go through today, but would be happy to talk about with others later. And I'm also offering office hours to all sorts of external stakeholders on Friday afternoons. So I think I'll end there, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Kevin. We look forward to the discussion at the end of the panel. So, the next panelist, you've heard from him the past couple of years, and every time he comes with something new. We're very excited about the progress we made in here. Cisco Vicente is the program manager of the Case for Quality program at CDRH. Cisco?
Thank you, Nadeem, and thank you guys for the opportunity here to present at least a little bit of our progress up to date. Next slide. So a lot of the work that we've got here within our Case for Quality is really about bringing that collaboration, that community together. We're looking at driving that principle of quality and safety through data transparency increases, that broad collaboration, and then, really driving some of that innovation in the quality and regulatory space. And this kind of shows and highlights a lot of the things coming together that we've got going on. The collaborative community, which is something that got kicked off very recently. Our CAPA pilot, the Accelerate Sustainable Capability pilot, our VIP program, and then a lot of the work that we're trying to do within that data space, right? MEDIAS and our Advanced Manufacturing Clearinghouse initiatives moving forward. Next slide. Just to give you a quick example, right? People keep asking, what are we doing with a lot of the stuff that's happening out of VIP? Well, this shows a lot of what VIP has done. Case study, and this is just one of our participants, not across the spectrum and board, but you could see the progression trends that go on year to year as they drive the improvements within their system. But more importantly than that, it's the internal benefits that the sites are also seeing, right? That benefit the patients, reduction in complaints, production increases, really bringing product availability to market. Root cause identification, reductions in timing, staff turnover, the culture changes. We've seen the value and improvements that we've collected from manufacturers. But the other piece of that is the recognition that doesn't mean perfection, right? There is still stuff that goes wrong. But what we've seen a lot of manufacturers demonstrate is that drive and that improvement and the ability to respond, react, and be more transparent with us, which I think makes everyone a bit better as we move forward. Next slide. Our CAPA pilot, just to improve, bringing and putting the plug in for this, because this has really driven a lot of that problem solving earlier in the cycle, right? Drive the improvements faster, prevent the issues from happening and getting out into the field. Participants have been reporting a lot of value and impact from this. Reductions in 80% in terms of the CAPA time and delays and closure that they need to go through. Next slide. This kind of highlights what we're looking at there and how many CAPAs and people have really taken through the process. So really consider looking at that on the NDIC website. Next slide over. And then finally, what we've got coming up next, it's really a lot of our focus on the advanced manufacturing efforts. This is where we're trying to help and move the needle on improving quality, systemizing a bit better, really being part of that solution more collectively as we move forward. And there's a lot of work along the way that we can talk about in several sessions later that, will help, I think, move the needle for industry and actually make things better and enable more data for use throughout the whole collaborative community we're working with. And with that, Nadeem, I will turn it back over to you and go forward from there.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cisco. Thank you very much. Our next panelist is Dr. Tim Stanzel, Director of the Office of In Vitro Diagnostics and Radiological Health. Tim will give us a clinical diagnostics update. Tim?
Thank you. Yes, a pleasure to give an update on clinical diagnostics. The work group has been extremely busy despite all the activities around COVID. Next slide, please. Here are some highlights of some programs that have shown extreme success. So first is Surrogate Sample. That is essentially done. It's a very great framework for when you have a challenge getting clinical samples and what are your options, or the options that you might have are detailed in this. Fingerstick it relates to a project that was recognized by the FDA that validation of fingerstick assays has unique challenges because of the limited amount of sample that you can get with each finger stick. That framework is nearly done, and we look forward to that being finalized. The somatic reference sample program is designed to accumulate samples of known genotype, particularly those that are present in cancers. And this program is in process. It is proved to be an expensive project, yet very important. So we look forward to seeing progress in the future on that. The clinical evidence document has been published, and that was also very well received. The first document for IVD real-world evidence was published last August. And this is an incredibly useful document. There are unique aspects to accumulating regulatory grade real-world evidence in IVD products. And as it so happens during this pandemic, we've been able to look to that document in some areas related to COVID, and perhaps we'll have time to discuss that later on. SHIELD is a program that MDIC is very interested in and has been helping with. SHIELD, of course, is a coding effort to identify and track individual IVD device results. Currently in our healthcare system, this is not done. It actually has a strong interplay with real-world evidence. Because as you look to real-world evidence, you want to know exactly what device was used and exactly what the result was. So these are intertwined, and both may be necessary to really move that forward in the IVD space. MDIC got involved with digital pathology. This is an expanding new area, and it is now culminated in the formation of a collaborative community, of which the FDA has joined. And finally, something related to COVID. On February 3rd of 2020, more than a year ago, just before the first EUA assay was authorized, MDIC and FDA co-sponsored a workshop. It was very timely, very helpful. It was, in its original effort, focused on converting EUAs to full authorizations. In the past, we had seen struggles with a number of developers making that transition. And so that workshop actually set us up in a timely way, not just for prior EUAs, but the future of this pandemic. Next slide, please. I won't go through the many successes that have involved, of course, many of the industry partners in MDIC. We now have more than 270 authorized EUA diagnostics, and we continue to work very hard. All the while, we have been continuing to work on non-COVID applications, and I'm happy to say that going forward now, we are no longer putting files on hold due to workforce shortages. And going forward, we're going to do it all, or we're going to try to do it all. Thank you very much. Back to you, Nadeem.
Thank you very much, Tim. I look forward to the Q&A session at the end. Our next panelist is a senior advisor in the Office of the Commissioner, Dr. Sean Tunis. And Sean will talk today about health economics, patient value, and real-world data. Sean?
Great. Well, thanks, Nadeem. So I've been working with CDRH and MDIC colleagues on achieving better policy alignment between FDA and CMS, as well as private payers around the use of real-world data with a focus on breakthrough technologies. And this work has been significantly enhanced by the efforts of the Medical Device Innovation Collaborative's Health Economics and Patient Value Initiative, particularly through its recent focus on the role of real-world evidence in coverage and payment decisions. I wanted to especially recognize the efforts of Joe Carroll Hyatt, Alex Blyther, Bob Giffen from MDIC, as well as Daniel Canos from CDRH, and Tamara Cyrick Jensen and Steve Farmer from CMS in moving this work forward. Next slide, please. So the FDA's real-world evidence activities gained significant momentum, as many of you know, since the 2016 passage of the 21st Century Cures Act. And this had a wide range of provisions for accelerating medical product development. The 2018 New England Journal article here offered a high-profile public acknowledgement about the potential for modern real-world data to achieve and to accelerate the generation of high-quality evidence. Next slide, please. Well, even before the 21st Century Cures Act, CMS and FDA have been working together along with industry, professional societies, patient groups, and others to promote rapid patient access and evidence development with the benefit of real-world data from clinical registries. This is a slide that's focused on the transcatheter valve therapy registry, which produced critical data on outcomes of transcatheter aortic valve replacement as it was adopted broadly in clinical care. One of the challenges that has been noted with this registry and some other clinical registries is the significant burden and cost associated with data collection. So next slide, please. And I apologize for the small font here. You're not really supposed to read individual items on this slide, but over the past 5 to 10 years, the healthcare data ecosystem has seen explosive growth, with the volume and quality of real-world data increasing at a tremendous rate, much faster really than our ability to fully understand how this data can be deployed most effectively. This is a recent graphic overview of some of the companies that comprise the health data ecosystem, and it's simply intended to convey the magnitude and complexity of the real-world data universe. So as you can probably imagine, this reflects enormous investments in time and energy in developing this data, and suggests the enormous potential value of real-world data. So next slide. So to help support discussions of how best to leverage this enormous real-world data resource that's growing so rapidly, the MDIC Health Economics and Patient Value Initiative convened a virtual public forum last month on the topic of real-world evidence in the context of payer decision-making. And this forum included presentations from CDRH, from the Coverage and Analysis Group at CMS, medical policy leaders from commercial payers, and real-world evidence experts from academia. And I think this meeting positioned MDIC's initiative as an important platform to support further dialogue on this critical topic of real-world evidence in market access and reimbursement decisions. Next slide and final slide. So going forward, there's a number of potential directions in which MDIC can help advance work in this space. This is a publication from last fall that summarizes the state of thinking in the European Union regarding payers, health technology assessment organizations around the use of real-world evidence in the context of highly innovative technologies. And the authors of this paper identified a number of areas of future work to help advance this field. So some of these areas include having regulators and payers work together to define real-world evidence requirements across the total product life cycle, promoting existing best practices for transparency, and conducting pilots. And we're looking forward to continue our collaboration with MDIC on these and other potential paths forward. So thanks, and turn it back over to Nadim.
Thank you, Sean. If I say I've ever seen a slide with so many logos, I probably would be lying. That shows how complicated and how comprehensive the effort that you're leading. And last but not least here, a returning panelist, Daniel Caños, who's the director of the Office of Clinical Evidence and Analysis. Daniel will give us an update on NEST as seen from the CDRH's perspective. Daniel?
Great, thank you. FDA is actively engaged with NEST stakeholder community to continue building out the system for more efficiently generating better evidence for medical device evaluation and regulatory decision-making throughout the total product lifecycle. Within this system, customers work with the NEST Coordinating Center, who leverages an analytic core to conduct protocolized analyses guided by the NEST methods and framework. And those studies are executed on a common platform with established governance, data quality standards, validated endpoints, verified completeness, and implemented common data models. In addition to that, this platform brings in tech partners, providing value to the network collaborators in the form of data solutions, including traceability, provenance, and methods to facilitate consistent device identification. And FDA has made investments within NEST to develop an active surveillance capability, building upon NEST's core functionality. Next slide, please. So FDA is actively involved with the NEST Coordinating Center to build out the system. With respect to the analytic core capabilities, FDA is working with NEST to scale up the system. These capabilities are further augmented by FDA's investment in the systems for active surveillance capabilities. Also, to work on the analytic capabilities, there's revisions to the data quality and methods framework document, originally issued in 2020, but those revisions are now underway. These new frameworks will provide greater clarity around how the system executes studies, and moving away from and transforming the data quality guiding principles and transforming those into data quality standards for the entire system. The establishment of standards are fundamental. It's a fundamental pillar for a NEST common study platform, ensuring clinical evidence generation is fit for purpose, that there's provenance in there, and appropriate data aggregation. This common platform is another area where NEST core functionality and FDA investments in active surveillance converge. CDRH is engaged with NEST in the establishment of a common data model and bringing technology solutions for ensuring data quality and completeness for that common platform. Additionally, the NEST collaborative community is taking on the challenge of a device identification as their first work stream. UDIs are an important component of reliably being able to ascertain device exposure with a high degree of confidence, particularly in the real-world data sources. It will take some time for all stakeholders to have universal adoption. NEST can provide a key role here in interim technology solutions, which crosswalk medical device product catalog numbers and other like variables to manufacture, make, model of these devices, thus providing further value to the network collaborators. The collaborators, which is a consistently growing list of participating institutions, which now stands at 16, covering over 61 million lives. NEST will bring even more institutions on board to arrive at a critical mass supportive of the active surveillance system with which FDA is working to build up. Finally, FDA is very engaged with the NEST Coordinating Center and the network collaborators and the investigators of the 21 test cases to maximize the impact of those test cases and incorporate lessons learned back into the system. Thank you, and back to you, Nadim.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel. Fantastic. So let me invite every participant in here on the panel to join me back up on the screen. And this is time for some questions and answers. And actually, my first question will go to you, Jeff, if you don't mind here. You know how much I care about our MedTech innovation ecosystem. And Let me ask you to project a little bit to the future. How do you see this public-private partnership helping shape the regulatory landscape of medical device innovations?
It's a good question. I think as you've heard in this session, MDIC's collaboratively developed work products are playing a critical role in CDRH programs and increasingly being adopted or leveraged by our external stakeholders. I mean, I foresee that MDIC's positive impact on medical device innovation and safety will continue and to expand. I think how much greater MDIC's impact can be will depend on the ability to increase available resources to support its work. And I think achieving that goal is a collaborative effort worth investing in because it could pay off big dividends for all stakeholders, starting with patients.
Thank you, Jeff. My follow-up question is actually to Tim here. Last year, we had testing and diagnostic were on top of the list during the pandemic, and MDIC launched its Open Hands project to pave the way here for using the in vitro diagnostic real-world evidence in regulatory submissions to convert those EUAs, so the emergency use authorizations, into 510Ks. Could you speak here to the potential impact that this project has on the future of diagnostic technologies?
Absolutely. Thank you. I'll just cover a little bit about the project right now. So in August of 2020, MDIC released the framework for incorporating real-world evidence, real-world data into pre-market regulatory decision-making for IVDs. There are unique aspects of real-world evidence for IVDs, and so this was a very helpful document. Immediately, manufacturers began looking for opportunities to utilize the guideposts that are in that document. The Open Hand effort was created by the MDIC working group, the Diagnostics working group, in order to gain experience in utilizing real-world evidence as a source of valid scientific evidence to support, first and foremost, the conversion of EUAs to 510Ks. Ultimately, though, we want to take the lessons learned from these conversions to, of course, apply it to other COVID submissions, but also to non-COVID submissions. So to date, we have been focusing on the use of pre-market submissions to examine the questions solely related to the use of real-world evidence. Some of these devices, such as serology devices, are well known to the FDA. However, the use of real-world evidence in full applications and using real-world evidence has not yet been demonstrated. So as of now, 2 sponsors have gone through this pre-submission review process. We learned a lot in this process, engaging in this open hand manner with the sponsors to better understand how to use real-world evidence. The participating sponsors conveyed that they really gained important insights as well through the pre-submission process. We look forward to additional pre-submissions in the Open Hand program. And again, by gaining experience here in the EUA space, we hope to pave the way for non-COVID IVD submissions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. What you guys are doing with this project is simply amazing. It's a textbook example of how to turn a crisis into an opportunity. So thank you. My next question here is to Andy Farb and Maureen Dreyer. And Andy, particularly, you've been an engine in here behind the early feasibility study initiative in the cardiovascular structural heart space, and you've been, pushing this forward. And we made great strides in this area. So could you maybe help us understand how these learnings and methods can be used to impact other clinical areas outside of the structural heart space?
Thanks, Nadeem, for the question. When CDRH kicked off the EFS program, there was a good deal of enthusiasm and interest, and we had an uptick in the ID submissions and pre-submissions that have steadily grown. But we realized pretty quickly that there are several essential steps beyond FDA that needed to be addressed to really get the sites up and running and the studies going. And that included things like IRB approval, contracting, budgeting, and other startup activities for which sites may not have been doing this recently, and they sort of need to re-engage and get their muscle memory going. So at that point, MD stepped in and conducted analysis of EFS IDEs led by Chip Hance and Liana Rincon-Gonzalez. And that showed that FDA and the IRB were really doing a pretty good job in our timely reviews and approval. And sites had improved their time to first patient enrollment, but there were still significant delays in things like contracting and budgeting that needed to be overcome. And here, I think the tools that MDIC developed have helped greatly, particularly Master Clinical Trials Agreement Template, along with workshops with included regulators, the sites, the sponsors, to share their EFS experience and best practices. And going forward, we think this approach can be successfully scaled up to other device areas. And our first target is in the neurovascular space. And as Maureen has noted, I think us here at FDA are in the EFS program are eager to help this move forward.
Maureen, can I put you on the spot? Yeah, keep going.
Thanks. Maybe I could just add a little bit. You know, one of the things that CDRH has done to really help EFS gain a footing within many different clinical areas is to have representatives from the different offices of health technology participate and come together regularly to discuss the program. And we learn from each other in those meetings and those interactions on what best practices we have at FDA for helping to review the IDEs and move them through the process towards approval. The other thing that Andy mentioned was some of the tools that MDIC had developed, initially focusing on that structural heart space. The fundamentals of those tools are really the same and can be leveraged across different device areas. So we do think that other sponsors could benefit from some of the fundamentals within those tools as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Maureen. And Andy, thank you a lot for all of your effort in this space as well. Remember one meeting a few years ago when this started and we're thinking this is a dream and now it's reality. Fantastic job, both Andy, Maureen, and everybody who's helped you on this. And Michelle, let me turn to you here. You've spoken so eloquently on the many successful FDA efforts in patient science and engagement that are actually complementary to MDIC's science of patient input efforts. And I mentioned that I'm involved, my company is involved in at least one of those projects, and we see it only through the lens of one project, but you see it from all of the projects going on. So how do you see this partnership going next, and to continue encouraging the inclusion of patient voices in the development and evaluation of medical devices?
We've been talking about incorporating the patient's voice for over a decade, and it's been really encouraging and invigorating to see how many people have ascribed to that same message. We've been working collaboratively with MDIC almost at the leading edge in developing methods and putting forth a framework on how one might incorporate patient preference studies in medical device evaluation. But as we move forward, there's new opportunities. And in fact, COVID-19 has really taught us a big lesson about the ways in which patients can be empowered, not only in the delivery of healthcare, but also in the continuing conduct of clinical trials that would have shut down if patients weren't engaged and willing to collect data through different novel tools. So I think as we look forward, we've got an opportunity both to help educate and empower patients from diverse patient populations, including patients who are underrepresented in clinical investigations, so that they can be more activated to help design studies that meet their needs and measure what's important to them. I think we also have the opportunity to use patient-generated health data. You've seen and heard a lot about sensor-based technologies and the opportunities that they afford. And so better developing the methodologies and the ways in which we can incorporate it into studies, I think is going to be critical. We're already seeing the beginning of that with the new digital vertical that you all are creating in MDIC. And so really excited to see the work that will lead to with almost the blending of the science of patient input with the digital realm. So really excited to hear what everybody else is willing to tackle and do, and the ways that they're exploring bringing the patient's voice to bear in the work that we all are doing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic, Michelle. I always felt that we are sitting in our ivory towers and deciding what patients need without asking them. And this is so crucial. It's a great time as well to bring this initiative forward. Thank you for all of your effort, Michelle, in this area and the successes so far. And let me turn to Cisco here quickly. So, Cisco, in my company, we have an amazing leader in quality, Al Kraus, who's piloted the Case for Quality projects inside CDRH. And I saw the benefits firsthand. So I am sold on it totally. Now, can you share, though, with the audience how Case for Quality projects like the advanced manufacturing and computer software assurance, for example, can help continuing to advance the medical device quality?
Absolutely, and thank you. Al Cross has been phenomenal, an advocate, and really had brought a lot of insight, especially early on in when we were kicking off. Really, one of the foundational drivers and moving things forward. When we talk about even that work, right, what VIP has done, we've shown that we can engage differently and collaborate from a business process, right, bringing value back into the idea of the quality system, management activities that go on to improve the product, the business organization's growth, bring collective value across the spectrum. But that's only going to get us so far, right? The advanced manufacturing efforts are really about taking that next step, right? How do we enable those tools, those technologies, the stuff that increases that resiliency of the organization, increases the data available, the insight into the knowledge of the product that then cascades down to the patient. That's really what all that advanced manufacturing effort is about. It's going to that next stage in that quality journey. And the work we're trying to do is bringing that same enthusiasm and collective community engagement that came on with the VIP development into that technology space. From a computer software assurance standpoint, it's again where we as an agency really help to drive a change and contribute. It's identifying and looking at those policies that will facilitate that technology enablement. Right? There's a way that we can help reset the thinking and drive more of that engagement and acceleration as we move forward. And that's really what we've seen happen. And even after we start some of that fire within the spectrum of things, we see a lot of that community take it much further, which has happened again with even the CSA case, where everybody's coming together to share their activities among each other and best practices.
Fantastic. Thank you, Cisco, a lot. My next question here is actually to Kevin. Kevin, I'm sure you recall here recently, many of us waited in line at gas stations due to a ransomware cyber attack and a component of our infrastructure. And for many people, it was a stark reminder how crucial cybersecurity is for everything we do, but particularly for medical technologies, particularly those devices that are implanted in our bodies. Your cybersecurity boot camps have been incredibly well received. So what do you think the next step is in continuing to help improve cybersecurity maturity in our medtech industry?
Well, I still think the threat modeling exercises are just the beginning, and it's just so important to have threat modeling. As you point out with the ransomware, one of the big consequences of ransomware is the inability to deliver patient care. In other words, unavailability. It's a very challenging situation. And with threat modeling, though, you can help identify some of these risks early. In particular, we are finding that the medical device manufacturers and HTOs are depending on the cloud in new ways compared to several years ago, where the essential functions of a medical device might actually depend upon the availability of the cloud. So I think it's going to be really important in these threat modeling exercises to better understand what one is truly depending upon when you use cloud technology as an optional feature as opposed to essential function.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Kevin. Absolutely. Sean, I have a quick question for you. And actually, it's a quick question, but you can take as much time as you need for the answer. How do you see the evolution of the real-world data and real-world evidence in coverage and reimbursement decisions?
Yeah, thanks. Well, a couple of things. One is, I think we're going to witness a rapid increased attention to real-world data by payers and health technology assessment organizations, in part just as a response to the tremendous progress with the volume of data, the quality of data, the sophistication of the methods for analyzing the data. So it's it's becoming part of just the decision-making atmosphere, and I think we're going to see that continue rapidly. Where I think is one of the kind of the lowest hanging fruit opportunities for real-world data in the context of reimbursement decisions is sort of post-coverage studies of high-value technologies, particularly breakthrough technologies. As you're well aware, CMS took a pause on their Medicare coverage of innovative technologies, but it's very clear that the agency remains committed to finding a policy framework for adopting breakthrough technologies that are approved by the FDA and demonstrated to be safe and effective, and relying on real-world data as the means to address the specific gaps in evidence from the perspective of Medicare. And so I think there's likely to be rapid progress for the high-value breakthrough technologies for which there are specific gaps in evidence that could be addressed through real-world data. And I think for that to work most effectively, ideally, it will be possible for companies as they're developing their clinical development plans with the FDA to bring in the perspectives of what may be missing at the time of approval, so those studies can be planned and developed in cooperation with the real-world data ecosystem to most efficiently generate that data.
Yeah, absolutely. Sean, actually, in this recent iteration of the MCIT discussion, I had the opportunity of working with 67 other CEOs, and it was unbelievable how much there was hunger in here to collect real-world evidence after a product is released to see how it's performing in the real world. So you can count on all of us in here to continue working with you on figuring out the way to do this, to bridge this gap. Thank you again, Sean, for everything you're doing. And Daniel, let me ask you the similar question here, the one that I just asked to Sean. How do you see the use of real-world data and evidence continue to evolve and impact the medical device regulatory submissions?
Sure. As I mentioned, lessons learned from the initial work with NEST are being fed back into the system in the form of revisions to the data quality and methods framework documents, improvements to the overall system. And we've also engaged in a kind of a learn by doing approach in the center. We recently published 90 examples that illustrate the regulatory decisions based on real world evidence. While not all inclusive, the list of submissions provides a sample that relied on real world evidence, either for the sole source, primary source, or secondary source of clinical evidence upon which the regulatory decisions were based. We dialed in our initial experience with RWE, highlighted in that work, as well as the experience from the test cases, into trainings for reviewers. Actually, we just had a training just a couple of weeks ago. So the system will evolve, and our level of experience and proficiency is increasing with each and every one of these interactions. In addition to that, kind of that learning by doing approach and those improvements and proficiencies, and also in addition to the great patient-generated health data work that Michelle described, I believe that we'll also see evolution in how we approach prospective clinical studies as we leverage RWD from EHRs, from claims, from registries, to more efficiently target enrollment for therapies aimed at rare diseases and health disparities and other populations of interest. So both leveraging the extant data on hand for clinical evidence generation for regulatory decisions, but also using it to inform and target trials for very important populations.
This is music to my ears, Dan. When we started down this path of developing what became NAST, it was built based on the fact that this will provide us with early warning signals, but also to facilitate and augment and made the regulatory submissions even more solid. So I'm so happy to see how the agency is working so much on this hand in hand with MDIC. So switching gears here, since we're running short on time, I'm going to ask all of the panelists in here one question. If you can, just 30 seconds to a minute. Outside, it feels like we may be approaching the end of the pandemic. I hope that we're not speaking too fast on this. But if it's true, it is time to start looking back and see how the agency FDA, but also within the MDIC construct, we all responded to this COVID-19 public health emergency, and each of you had to do some innovation and do some things differently within your own area during that pandemic. So help share with the audience here, what have you learned, and how would these learnings that you had during the pandemic will impact your future efforts in your own area once the pandemic is over, so after the pandemic? So let's go quickly around the table, and I will end up with Jeff. Daniel, let me start with you.
Thank you.
Daniel,
yes. And so what one of the challenges we learned that we came across right away is that the data systems, public health systems, aren't integrated in a way to meet the need. And we've done a lot of work in with the stakeholders to start to connect the pipes on these data systems and jointly solve for problems. One of the first enterprises taken on was an evidence accelerator with the Reagan-Udall Foundation, and really solving for problems for diagnostics and therapeutics for COVID-19, where we put out challenges to all stakeholders, healthcare providers, folks with running the data systems, et cetera, and came up with solutions across the board and came together to both improve the system, compare notes on where the challenges are, and solve for those challenges. So I would envision moving forward that we would build upon this diagnostics accelerator model and therapeutics accelerator model, where we come together and continue to come together in these such venues to solve for problems in the future and build a system where all the pipes are connected, and all the stakeholders can jointly solve for these challenges.
Fantastic. Tim, how about you?
There's so many lessons learned. I'll pick one, and it may be MDIC related, and that is the use of the Eua Templates in this pandemic. So early on, we created a template for molecular assays, and then we expanded upon that. I think we have 6 or 7 templates now, and they've gone on under revision. So what developers, both labs and industry partners, many of them MDIC, needed was clear recommendations from the FDA about how to validate their tests. We've had tremendous feedback with this. They continue to evolve. And I think we can expand this to non-COVID activities. And then we can also prepare for the next pandemic by refining these templates, perhaps for a number of different types of emergencies, and be ready to go with them. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tim. Andy, how about for you?
So, Nadim, so EFS faced the same challenges as larger studies. In some cases, we're probably more vulnerable because of the travel restrictions. You couldn't have proctors needed to be at some of these procedures, which are maybe particularly important for innovative and novel technologies. So going forward, EFS, like all clinical trials, need to consider ways to pivot to alternative strategies to capture data and to engage in new and novel study monitoring activities if a similar situation, and that includes things that we've been using right now, telemedicine, in-home assessments, digital medicine. Some good news on the EFS front during the pandemic, that interest in the program remained high, perhaps because these studies do address unmet clinical needs, and they may represent a more higher priority research area. So we were gratified to see that. But it starts with the patient need and what these studies are aimed to address.
Absolutely. Kevin, how about you?
I think one of the lessons learned from the pandemic is just the importance of good science and engineering. And when it comes to cybersecurity, what used to be more of an art form and more of an ad hoc nature has really matured to the point where there is a science of cybersecurity. And I think we're going to be able to use that, especially in the pre-market reviewing at looking at risk, but as well as in the post-market. So I think science is probably the number one lesson learned about making good decisions for safety and effectiveness.
Yeah. Cisco?
I think a lot of our industry really experienced the impact of not having the right technologies and stuff in place. So I'm going to see a lot of acceleration of the advanced manufacturing efforts. I think we've already heard the enthusiasm and commitment around that one to begin with, externally and internally. But the other piece of this was just, again, the idea of that collaboration. We saw a lot of ability to really respond quickly in better solutions across the whole community versus just, is it just FDA or industry? So I think there's going to be more of that moving forward as we progress.
Yeah, exactly. Sean?
Yeah, I would hit the theme also of the importance of these, public-private sector collaborations like MDIC, but certainly, as Daniel mentioned, the evidence accelerator with the partnership with the Reagan-Udall Foundation, and how much we can learn from each other and teach each other when we kind of show up in good faith and are willing to be, generous in exchanging information. And I guess along with that is just, when people have an important problem to solve, they step up and they put in the time and they put in the effort in a various generous way. And I think, while the pandemic was obviously a unique situation, I think as we continue to identify important problems to solve for public health, we can continue the sort of productive collaborations that we got experience with in the pandemic.
Exactly. Michelle?
I think to build on that message of collaboration, I mean, our strategic priority has been collaborative communities. And we know that by having all the stakeholders at the table, including the patients, we really do generate solutions that help everyone. And so one of the things that we learned from the pandemic is the importance of including those patients in the conversation, but we also have to give them the tools so that they can give data. And one of the opportunities that I see going forward is ways that we can put tools in the hands of all patients from all diverse backgrounds so that they can contribute the information that can help inform how we evaluate and look at medical devices.
Thank you. And Jeff?
Let me mention two. The first is regulatory flexibility. When the public health emergency was declared, we could leverage our emergency use authorization authorities, and that gave us the flexibility to adapt our regulatory evidentiary and other expectations to the technology and the circumstances and make changes as appropriate as we learn more. And that combined with the second lesson learned, engagement, our ability to work with developers in real time to solve problems, answer their questions, review data on a rolling basis. Those two together were critical for helping us to authorize over 1,300 medical devices for COVID under emergency use or traditional pathways. And I think if we had the regulatory authority for agile regulation, tailor expectations really to the technology, and we had the capacity for that real-time engagement with developers as an add-on to things like the more formal pre-submission meetings, that would be a game changer in the medical device ecosystem. We would drive innovation and safety in ways unimagined today.
Phenomenal close. Thank you, Jeff. And let me take here this opportunity of thanking all of you. During the pandemic, it was hard on everybody, but particularly on you. You had extra work to do during these situations. And not only you were able to deliver on commitments, as I said earlier, but you also kept moving forward this dialogue, these initiatives. I'm old enough to remember 15 years ago when the discussion between FDA and the medtech innovators was all about how to file a 510K or how to file a submission. Well, those are still very important, but just look at how this dialogue has improved and all of the initiatives you are creating to accelerate here the innovation and keep it as safe as ever and as effective as ever, or effectiveness as high as ever that we've ever seen. So thank you all. I'm running short of words here what to say, and I look forward to the next session. Bye-bye.